Chapter 1. The party. Brad Grahm had never been the guy to make grand speeches about life, but if someone asked him what he thought about risk, he'd say this: life is a risk. You don't stop living because of it. You just get good at spotting red flags before they wave you into disaster. That philosophy had served him well so far. No broken hearts, no messy breakups, and definitely no divorces. He'd seen enough of those to last a lifetime. 3 of his closest friends had managed to rack up 2 divorces each before turning 30. 2 divorces. Before 30. Brad wasn't against marriage, but he wasn't blind either. Love was beautiful, sure, but it wasn't bulletproof. Tonight, though, he wasn't thinking about marriage or risk. He was thinking about how his apartment smelled faintly of barbecue sliders and champagne, and how his living room was packed with 16 of their friends, all laughing, drinking, and counting down the last hours of the year. Gina had outdone herself with the decorations: gold streamers, a glittering 2026 banner, and enough fairy lights to make the place look like a Pinterest board exploded. Brad smiled as he watched her move through the crowd, laughing with her friends, her dark hair catching the glow of the lights like a halo. She was good at this, hosting, making people feel welcome. He admired that about her. Brad leaned against the kitchen counter, nursing a beer, when his buddy Mark launched into a debate about aliens. "I'm telling you, Brad," Mark said, waving a tortilla chip like it was a pointer in a lecture hall. "If aliens exist, they've already been here. Area 51? That's not a joke." Brad grinned. "Sure, Mark. And what did they do when they got here? Took a selfie with the Grand Canyon and left." Mark shook his head, dead serious. "Probes, man. They're all about probes." Brad laughed. "You think an advanced species traveled light years just to play doctor with us? That's your theory. Hey, don't knock it. Curiosity is universal." Brad was mid-sip when he heard Gina's laugh from across the room. It was bright, easy, the kind of laugh that made people lean in. He glanced over. She was with a group of her friends near the couch, all of them perched with champagne flutes, talking fast and loud like women do when they're half a glass away from secrets. "So how's it going with Brad?" one of them asked, teasing. Brad didn't mean to eavesdrop. He wasn't the jealous type, but something about the question made his ears perk up. He expected Gina to beam and say something sweet, maybe even brag a little. They'd been together for 2 years. Surely she had something good to say. Gina smiled, her lips curving in that calm, polite way she used when she was being diplomatic. "Brad's nice." That was it. 2 words. "Brad's nice." Brad froze, beer halfway to his mouth. Nice? That's like getting a D in love. Not failing, but definitely not honor roll. He wasn't angry. Brad didn't do angry over stuff like this. He was clear. Crystal clear. His grandfather's voice echoed in his head. "Kid, if you want to know how someone really feels about you, listen when they don't think you're listening." Grandpa was right. Grandpa was always right. Just ask him. Brad set his beer down slowly, his smile still in place for Mark's benefit. Inside, something shifted. He wasn't ending the relationship tonight. He wasn't going to sulk or throw a fit. That wasn't him. But he accepted what Gina had just told him without even knowing it. He was fine for now. Placeholder. Nice enough until something better came along. He knew the game. He wasn't under any illusions that he was the best-looking guy in the room. He didn't care about that. He liked who he was. But if Gina saw him as nice and nothing more, then Brad wasn't about to keep investing his heart like it was a blue-chip stock. He wasn't punishing her. He was protecting himself from the inevitable heartbreak. Mark nudged him. "You okay, man? You look like you just saw an alien." Brad smirked. "Just thinking about probes." Mark laughed, oblivious, and launched into another theory about government cover-ups. Brad let him talk, nodding at the right moments, but his mind was elsewhere. He glanced at Gina again. She was laughing at something her friend said, her eyes bright, her hand gesturing in the air like she was painting her words. She looked happy, and Brad realized something. He wanted her to be happy. He just wasn't sure if that happiness included him long-term. The countdown started. 10, 9, 8, and everyone shouted along. Gina found him in the crowd at 3, slipping her arm around his waist like she always did. He kissed her at midnight because that's what you do, and for a moment it felt like everything was fine. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. Brad didn't know yet, but he knew this. The new year had just started, and so had his quiet experiment. No drama, no fights, just observation. Actions speak louder than words, and Brad was about to start listening with his eyes. Chapter 2, The Silent Pivot. Brad wasn't the kind of guy who made dramatic resolutions on New Year's Day. He didn't wake up declaring, "New Year, new me." He woke up declaring, "Coffee first, then maybe me." But this year, something had shifted. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but quietly, like a door closing in the back of his mind. He sat at his kitchen table the morning after the party, nursing a mug of black coffee while the apartment looked like a glitter bomb had gone off. Gold streamers drooped like tired snakes, and a half-empty champagne bottle stood on the counter like it had survived a war. Gina was still asleep in the bedroom, her soft breathing drifting through the cracked door. Brad stared at the steam rising from his mug and thought about 2 words. He's nice. Nice. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't praise either. It was neutral. like calling a sunset fine or a puppy adequate. He didn't need Gina to write sonnets about him, but he'd hoped for something with a little more spark. Nice sounded like a placeholder, a safe bet until something better came along. Grandpa's voice echoed in his head again. Kid, if you want to know how someone really feels about you, listen when they don't think you're listening. Brad had listened. He'd heard. And now he was adjusting. Not breaking up. Not sulking. Just pivoting. Brad wasn't an emotional guy. He didn't do revenge or silent treatments. He did logic. And logic said, stop overinvesting in something that might not last. He'd been treating this relationship like a long-term stock, steady deposits of time, energy, and heart. But if Gina saw him as nice, then maybe this wasn't a blue-chip investment. Maybe it was a short-term bond. And you don't pour your life savings into a short-term bond. He smiled wryly at the thought. Man, I'm turning my love life into a finance seminar. Next thing you know, I'll be drawing charts. The bedroom door creaked open, and Gina padded out in one of his old t-shirts, hair tousled, eyes sleepy. She looked beautiful in that effortless way that made Brad's chest tighten, just enough to remind him why this wasn't easy. Morning, she said, voice soft. Morning, Brad replied casual, like nothing had changed, because nothing had, at least on the surface. She kissed his cheek, grabbed a glass of water, and started talking about brunch plans with her friends. Brad listened, nodding at the right spots, but inside, he was filing this moment under observation phase. He wasn't pulling away completely. He was watching, waiting, seeing if her words matched her actions. Brad's pivot wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Little things. When Gina texted him about lunch with her friends, he didn't drop everything like he used to. He had plans with his brother to watch football, and he kept them. Come on, Gina said over the phone, her tone light but expectant. It's just lunch. You love my friends. They're great, Brad said calm. But I already promised my brother. You guys have fun. There was a pause. Not long, but enough for Brad to hear the gears turning in her head. Okay, she said finally. Have fun. He hung up, tossed his phone on the couch and turned back to the game. No guilt. No second guessing. Just a quiet sense of balance. For 2 years, he'd been all in, always available, always accommodating. Now, he was still present, still caring, but not at the expense of himself. Felt good. Healthy even. Gina, on the other hand, felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't big. Just a flicker. A sense that something was off. Brad had never said no before. Not like that. She brushed it off. Told herself he deserved guy time. But later that night, as she scrolled through Pinterest boards of wedding decor she'd never admit to saving, the flicker returned. Brad didn't notice the flicker. He was too busy laughing at his brother's terrible fantasy football picks. But he did notice something else. He felt lighter. Not because he cared less, but because he wasn't carrying the weight of assumptions anymore. He wasn't trying to prove he was enough. He liked who he was. If Gina did too, great. If not, he'd survive. Still, a part of him wondered, what does nice look like in her head? A guy who holds doors, pays for dinner, sends good morning texts. Brad did all that. Maybe nice was just her default word. Or maybe it was her truth. Either way, he wasn't asking. Not yet. For now, he'd watch, listen, and wait for the answer to show up in her actions. Chapter 3, Lunch Invitation Fallout. Gina Blair prided herself on being perceptive. She could tell when her boss was about to drop a last-minute project, when her best friend was hiding a bad date, and when Brad was in a mood, usually because his favorite team lost. But lately, Brad was harder to read. Not distant exactly, but different, like someone had turned down the brightness a notch. It started with lunch. 3 weeks after the New Year's party, Gina had texted him, "Hey, come to lunch with me and the girls? They want to see you." Brad's reply came fast, polite, and unexpected. "Can't today. Watching the game with my brother. Have fun though." No emoji. No rain check. Just a clean, simple no. Gina stared at her phone, blinking. Brad never said no. Not like that. He was the guy who rearranged his Saturday to help her pick out throw pillows. The guy who drove across town for her favorite coffee when she had a bad day. And now he was busy? She told herself it was fine. He deserved guy time. But the flicker of unease stayed, like a tiny crack in a window you can't stop noticing. "Okay, spill," said Marcy, Gina's best friend, as soon as they slid into the booth at the cafe. "Where's Brad? He's usually glued to your side." Gina forced a smile. "Football with his brother." Marcy raised an eyebrow. "On a Saturday? That's new." "Not really," Gina said quickly. "He likes football." "Sure," Marcy said, stirring her iced latte like it had secrets. "But he also likes you, and he usually picks you over football." Gina laughed, a little too loud. "You're reading into nothing." "Am I?" Marcy leaned in, conspiratorial. "Guys don't just switch patterns for no reason. Did you two fight?" "No," Gina said firmly. "Everything's fine." But was it? She thought about the last few weeks. Brad was still sweet, still attentive, just less. Fewer texts during the day. No spontaneous calls. He wasn't cold, but he wasn't warm either. like someone had dimmed the lights. Marcy smirked. You know what this is? The slow fade. Gina rolled her eyes. Please. Brad's not like that. Every guy is like that when he's losing interest, Marcy said, sipping her latte like she was delivering gospel truth. Gina shook her head, but her stomach tightened. Losing interest? No. Brad loved her. She was sure of it. Mostly sure. 90% sure. Okay. 85. Brad was stretched out on his brother's couch, laughing at a replay of a fumbled pass. His phone buzzed with Gina's Instagram story. Brunch pics, mimosas, Marcy making a duck face. He smiled faintly and set the phone aside. He wasn't avoiding Gina. He wasn't playing games. He was just recalibrating. For 2 years, he'd been all in, always available, always accommodating. And what had that earned him? Nice. 2 syllables that sounded like a participation trophy. Brad wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was clear. If Gina saw him as nice, then maybe he needed to stop acting like a guy auditioning for Husband of the Year. He liked her. He cared about her. But he wasn't going to keep pouring his soul into something that might not be permanent. His brother tossed him a beer. You look deep in thought. That's dangerous. Brad grinned. Just thinking about football. Liar, his brother said, cracking open his own bottle. You've got that relationship math face. Brad laughed. What's that supposed to mean? You know, when you're calculating if staying is worth the emotional investment. Brad smirked. Maybe I'm just calculating the point spread. Aha, his brother said, unconvinced. Brad took a sip and let the game pull him back in. No drama. No fights. Just observation. Actions speak louder than words, and Brad was watching. Marcy wasn't done. Listen, Gina. If he's pulling back, you need to pull him in. Plan something fun. Remind him why he's lucky. Gina nodded, half listening, half worrying. She hated games. She hated strategies. But she hated uncertainty more. And right now, Brad felt uncertain. She smiled for her friends, laughed at their jokes, but inside, a question looped like a broken record. What changed? Chapter 4 The Test? Gina wasn't the type to play games. She hated the idea of strategies in relationships. Those magazine tips about waiting 3 hours to text back or pretending to be busy. But after brunch with Marcy and the girls, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted with Brad. He wasn't cold, but he wasn't warm either. He was neutral, and neutral was terrifying. So, she decided on something small. Not a game. A test. Monday morning, Gina sat at her desk, staring at her phone like it held the secrets of the universe. She typed, "Hope your day's going great. Miss your face." She hesitated, then added a smiley because emojis softened everything, and hit send. Brad's reply came 10 minutes later. "Day's good. Hope yours is too. No, miss you." No heart emoji. Just polite, efficient words. Gina frowned at her screen. Not bad. Not great. Neutral. Brad saw the text, smiled, and replied honestly. His day was good. He hoped hers was too. Simple. Genuine. He didn't tack on extra fluff because he wasn't in the mood to perform. For 2 years, he'd been the guy who wrote paragraphs, who sent memes, who called just to hear her voice. And what had that earned him? Nice. 2 syllables that sounded like a participation ribbon. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry. He was recalibrating. If Gina wanted more, she'd show it. If not, he'd keep his balance. No drama. No games. Just observation. Brad leaned back in his chair, smirking at the thought. Man, I'm turning my love life into a stock market analysis. He pictured a chart in his head. Initial investment. 2 years of time, energy, and heart. A current value. Nice. Risk assessment, moderate. Recommendation, hold. Don't buy more shares until market shows growth. He chuckled under his breath. If anyone could hear his thoughts, they'd think he'd lost it. But honestly, it made sense. Love was a risk, and Brad wasn't about to double down on a volatile market. 2 days later, Gina tried again. Dinner Friday, just us. My treat. Brad stared at the text for a moment. He liked dinner. He liked Gina. But he had plans. His brother had roped him into a poker night. Old Brad would have canceled without hesitation. New Brad? He didn't. Can't Friday. Poker night. Rain check. Gina read the reply twice. Poker night? Since when did Brad have poker nights? She typed back. Okay, have fun. She added a smiley, but her stomach nodded. This wasn't like him. He was always available, always eager. And now he was busy with poker. That night, Gina sat on her couch, scrolling through old photos of them. Beach trips, movie nights, goofy selfies. He looked happy in all of them. She looked happy too. So what changed? Was Marcy right? Was this the slow fade? She hated the thought. Brad wasn't like that. He wasn't a ghoster. He was steady, reliable, kind. Nice. The word popped into her head, and she winced. She hadn't meant it like that at the party. She'd been tipsy, distracted. But what if he'd heard? What if he thought that's all she felt? Gina closed her eyes and made a decision. No more guessing. She'd find out. Soon. Friday night, Brad sat at his brother's kitchen table, cards in hand, laughing at a terrible bluff. His phone buzzed with Gina's Instagram story. Her at home, wine glass in hand, captioned self-care night. He smiled faintly and set the phone aside. He wasn't avoiding her. He wasn't punishing her. He was just living. For 2 years, he'd been orbiting her like a moon, rearranging his gravity for her convenience. Now, he was finding his own center again. Felt good. Felt right. And if Gina wanted to meet him halfway, she would. If not, he'd survive. Brad tossed a chip into the pot and grinned. All in. Chapter 5: The Friend Factor. Gina didn't like involving other people in her relationship. She believed in privacy, in keeping things between two people. But after 2 weeks of Brad's polite detachment, she was desperate for perspective. So when Marcy texted, "Coffee? I have thoughts," Gina agreed against her better judgment. Marcy was already waiting, stirring her latte like it had secrets. "Okay," she said as Gina slid into the booth. "Update me. Is Brad still acting weird?" Gina sighed. "Not weird, just different. He's not texting as much. He's busy more often." Marcy smirked. Classic slow fade. Gina groaned. "Stop saying that." "Fine," Marcy said, leaning in. "But listen, guys don't pull back for no reason. Either he's stressed or he's losing interest. Which is it?" Gina hesitated. "He's not stressed. Works fine. And he's not losing interest." She said it like a prayer, hoping it was true. Marcy raised an eyebrow. "Then what changed?" Gina stared at her coffee, swirling the foam. What changed? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. She thought about the party, about her casual "Brad's nice." Had he heard? Could 2 words undo 2 years? Marcy tapped the table. "You need to talk to him. Or better yet, test him." Gina frowned. "Test him?" "Yeah," Marcy said, eyes gleaming. "Plan something romantic. See if he bites. If he doesn't, you have your answer." Gina hated the idea, but she hated uncertainty more. "Fine," she said. "I'll plan something." Brad was at the same cafe, different corner, different table, meeting his buddy Mark for a quick coffee before heading to the gym. He wasn't spying. He didn't even know Gina was there until he heard her laugh. He glanced up, and there she was, leaning toward Marcy, animated, intense. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but Marcy wasn't exactly whispering. "Test him," Marcy said, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "Plan something romantic. If he doesn't bite, dump him." Brad froze mid-sip. "Dump him?" He set his cup down slowly, his jaw tightening. Not with anger, but with clarity. He'd always believed one thing. A relationship is between two people, not a committee. He wasn't about to let outside interference steer his life. Mark noticed his expression. "You okay?" Brad smiled faintly. "Fine. Just reminded myself of something." "What's that?" Brad's voice was calm, absolute. "If I'm in a relationship, it's with one person. Not their friends. Not their family. Just them." Mark blinked. "Deep for a Tuesday." Brad chuckled. But inside, the line was drawn. He wasn't going to confront Gina. Not yet. But he wasn't going to play games either. If she wanted to talk, he'd talk. If she wanted to test him, he'd pass or fail on his own terms. No audience. No interference. Across the cafe, Gina was making her own decision. She'd planned something special. Something that reminded Brad why they worked. No drama. No pressure. Just a night for them. She smiled at Marcy, feeling a flicker of hope. "You're right. I'll fix this." Marcy grinned. "Atta girl." Gina didn't notice Brad leaving the cafe, his expression calm but unreadable. She didn't know he'd heard every word. And she definitely didn't know that her test was about to collide with Brad's quiet resolve in ways neither of them expected. Chapter 6: The Honest Talk. Almost. Gina had a plan. Not a test, at least that's what she told herself, but a gesture. Something romantic, something that reminded Brad why they worked. She booked a cozy Italian restaurant, the kind with dim lights and soft jazz, and even reserved a corner booth for privacy. Friday night, she'd show him that they were still solid. No drama. No pressure. Just them. She texted him midweek. "Dinner Friday? My treat. Just us." Brad replied within minutes. "Sounds good." 2 words. No emoji. No exclamation point. Gina stared at the screen, her stomach tightening. She wanted more. Something warm. Something reassuring. But she told herself not to spiral. He said yes. That was enough. For now. Brad saw the text and agreed. Simple. Honest. He wasn't avoiding her. He wasn't playing games. He was just steady. If Gina wanted to talk, he'd talk. If she wanted to laugh, he'd laugh. But he wasn't going to perform anymore. No grand gestures. No bending over backward to prove his worth. He liked her. He cared about her. But he wasn't auditioning for a role she hadn't offered. Still, a part of him wondered if tonight would be the night, the conversation. The one where they laid it all out. He wasn't afraid of it. He welcomed it. Clarity was better than guessing. The restaurant was warm and intimate, all amber lights and soft music. Gina arrived early, nerves buzzing like static. She wore his favorite color, deep blue, and ordered a glass of wine to steady herself. When Brad walked in, tall and calm in a crisp button-down. Her heart did that annoying flip it always did. He smiled when he saw her, and for a moment, everything felt normal. "Hey," he said, leaning in for a quick kiss before sliding into the booth. "Hey," she replied, smiling too brightly. "You look good." "So do you," Brad said, easy, relaxed. He picked up the menu like they were any couple on any Friday night. Gina stared at him, wondering how he could look so calm when her insides felt like a blender. They ordered pasta for her, steak for him, and made small talk about work, the weather, a funny meme Brad had seen. Gina laughed, but her mind was elsewhere, rehearsing the words she needed to say. "Are we okay? Did I do something? Do you still want this?" Finally, when the plates were cleared and dessert menus appeared, she took a breath. "Brad," she began, voice soft. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Sure." Her heart thudded. This was it. The moment. "Do you feel like something's changed between us?" Brad opened his mouth to answer, and then the interruption arrived. "Gina? Oh my God." A voice squealed from across the room. Gina turned and her stomach sank. It was Marcy. Of course it was Marcy. And she wasn't alone. Two other friends trailed behind her like backup singers. "What are you doing here?" Marcy gushed, sliding up to the table without invitation. "Date night? Cute." Gina forced a smile. "Yeah, just us." Marcy grinned at Brad. "Hey stranger, haven't seen you in forever." Brad smiled politely, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Gina saw it. She felt it. And she hated it. Marcy kept talking about the restaurant, about the wine, about a new yoga class, until Gina wanted to scream. By the time Marcy finally left, the moment was gone. The question hung in the air like smoke, but Gina couldn't bring herself to light it again. Brad paid the bill, walked her to the car, and kissed her goodnight. It was warm. It was real. But it wasn't clarity. Driving home, Brad gripped the wheel, his mind steady but firm. He'd been ready to talk. He'd wanted to talk. But the interruption reminded him of something he'd already decided. A relationship is between two people, not a committee. If Gina wanted answers, she'd have to ask, without an audience. Chapter 7, The Confrontation. Gina had replayed Friday night in her head a dozen times. The restaurant, the candlelight, the perfect setup, and then Marcy barging in like a rom-com villain. She'd wanted clarity. Instead, she got small talk about yoga classes. By Sunday, the frustration had simmered into resolve. No more interruptions. No more guessing. She was going to talk to Brad. Tonight. She texted him. "Can we talk tonight? Just us. No distractions." Brad replied almost instantly, "Sure. Come over." 2 words again. Always 2 words. Gina stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. This was it. No backing out. Brad saw the text and felt calm. He'd been waiting for this. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't defensive. He was ready. If Gina wanted honesty, she'd get it. No sugarcoating. No performance. Just truth. Gina arrived at 7, clutching a bottle of wine like it was armor. Brad opened the door, casual in jeans and a t-shirt, and smiled. "Hey, hey," she said, stepping inside. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and clean laundry. Familiar. Safe. Which made what she was about to do feel even harder. They sat on the couch, wine glasses in hand, silence stretching like a rubber band. Finally, Gina took a breath. "Brad, are we okay?" Brad looked at her, steady, calm. "Depends," he said, "on what you want this to be." Gina blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Brad said, setting his glass down, "I'm not pulling away because I don't care. But I'm done over-investing in something if I'm not sure it's long-term." Gina's stomach dropped. "Long-term? Brad, where's this coming from?" He held her gaze. "New Year's Eve. You were talking to your friends. Someone asked about us. You said, 'Brad's nice.'" Gina froze. "You heard that?" "Yeah," Brad said, voice even. "And look, I'm not mad, but it told me something. If nice is all I am to you, then maybe I need to stop acting like I'm auditioning for forever." Gina stared at him, words tangling in her throat. "Brad, I didn't mean it like that. I was tipsy, distracted. I should have said more." Brad shrugged lightly. "Maybe, but that's what came out when you weren't thinking." Gina set her glass down, leaning forward. "You think you're just nice to me? Brad, you're so much more than that. You're steady. You're kind. You make me feel safe. I love that about you." Brad's brow lifted. "Safe is good. But safe isn't enough if it feels like temporary." "It's not temporary," Gina said quickly. "I've been planning our future in my head for months. I've imagined kids' names, for crying out loud." Brad blinked, surprised. "Kids' names?" Gina flushed. "Don't make it weird." Brad chuckled, the tension cracking just a little. "Hope they're not named after your ex-boyfriends." She laughed despite herself, relief flooding in. "No, definitely not." Brad leaned back, studying her. "So, you want this?" "Yes," Gina said, fierce now. "I want this. I want you." Brad nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "Then say that. Show that. Because I'm not interested in being nice. I'm interested in being enough. Gina reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. You are enough. More than enough. Brad's lips curved into a small, real smile. Good. Because I was about 2 weeks away from buying a dog and calling it a day. Gina laughed, tears stinging her eyes. You'd name it something ridiculous. Probably, Brad said, grinning now. Like Chairman Bark. She laughed harder, the knot in her chest finally loosening. For the first time in weeks, the air felt clear. Honest. Real. Later, as they curled up on the couch, Brad thought about risk. Love was a risk. Always had been. But some risks were worth taking, especially when the other person was willing to take it with you. Chapter 8, The Reset. The conversation changed everything. Not because it solved every problem, but because it cleared the fog. For the first time in weeks, Brad and Gina felt like they were on the same page. No guessing. No games. Just honesty. And with honesty came something they hadn't felt in a while. Freedom to have fun. It started with Gina's idea. Let's do something stupid, she said over text. Like bowling. Brad replied, bowling isn't stupid. It's a sport of kings. She laughed out loud at her desk. You're ridiculous. Friday night, they hit the local bowling alley. A neon-lit relic from the 90s with sticky floors and a jukebox that only played songs older than both of them. Gina strutted up to the lane like a pro, grabbed a pink ball, and promptly guttered her first shot. Brad grinned. Wow, that was majestic. Shut up, Gina said, laughing. I was warming up. Brad's turn was no better. His ball veered left like it had a vendetta. Gina doubled over, laughing. Sport of kings, huh? Clearly, Brad said, deadpan. I'm royalty. By the third frame, they were both terrible and neither cared. They laughed until their sides hurt, high-fived like kids, and shared greasy fries that tasted like nostalgia. For the first time in weeks, Gina felt light. Brad did too. The next weekend, Brad suggested cooking dinner together. How hard can pasta be? He said confidently. Turns out, harder than expected. Gina watched in horror as Brad dumped an entire box of spaghetti into a pot barely big enough for half. Brad, that's not how. It's fine, Brad said, stirring like a man possessed. It'll cook down. Didn't. The noodles clumped into a starchy brick, and the sauce. Oh, the sauce. Ended up tasting like tomato-flavored regret. Gina laughed so hard she cried. This is inedible. Brad grinned, wiping sauce off his shirt. We're innovators. Pasta bricks will be huge in 5 years. They ordered pizza and ate on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of their culinary ambitions. Gina snapped a photo of Brad holding the pasta brick like a trophy. Caption, Chef of the Year. Brad smirked. Send it to Gordon Ramsay. He'll cry. One night, Gina pulled out her phone and said, Okay, BuzzFeed quiz time. Brad groaned. Please tell me this isn't, what Disney princess are you? Worse, Gina said, grinning. What kind of couple are you? Brad leaned back, amused. Do we get a prize if we're the power couple? Bragging rights, Gina said, scrolling. First question. Who apologizes first after a fight? Brad smirked. Neither. We just sulk until someone offers food. True, Gina said, laughing. Next. Who's more romantic? Brad raised an eyebrow. Define romantic. Not pasta bricks, Gina said. Brad chuckled. Then probably you. They finished the quiz and got the chill couple. Gina read the description aloud. You're laid back, low drama, and prefer laughter over arguments. Brad grinned. Sounds accurate. Gina smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. Accurate and exactly what she wanted. Later that night, as Gina dozed off on his couch, Brad watched her, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Certainty. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. They'd fought without fighting. They'd laughed without pretending. And for Brad, that mattered more than any label. Life was a risk. Love was a risk. But some risks, worth every gutter ball and pasta brick. Chapter 9, The Slip. Brad had learned something about Gina over the past few weeks. When she was happy, she talked. Not just about work or friends, but about everything. Future vacations, dream houses, even what kind of dog they'd get someday. He liked that about her. It made him feel like she was leaning in again, not pulling away. Tonight, they were sprawled on Brad's couch, a half-empty bowl of popcorn between them, watching a cheesy rom-com that Gina insisted was a classic. Brad wasn't convinced, but he was entertained, mostly by Gina's running commentary. Oh my God, she said, pointing at the screen. Nobody just quits their job and moves to Paris like that. Real life doesn't work that way. Brad smirked. You sound jealous. Please, Gina said, tossing a kernel at him. If I moved to Paris, you'd follow me. Brad caught the kernel midair and popped it in his mouth. Depends. Is there good Wi-Fi? She laughed, curling her legs under her. You're impossible. Brad grinned. And yet, you keep me around. Yeah, Gina said softly, almost to herself. I do. The movie rolled on, some dramatic airport scene playing out, when Gina spoke again, casual, distracted, like she wasn't even thinking. If we ever have kids, Remind me not to name them something pretentious like Chadwick. Brad froze mid-chew. Kids. Gina blinked, realizing what she'd said. Oh, hypothetically. Brad set the popcorn down, his lips twitching. Hypothetically, you've already named them, haven't you? Gina flushed. No. Brad raised an eyebrow. Gina. She groaned, covering her face with a pillow. Fine. Maybe I thought about it once or twice. Brad chuckled, leaning back. Once or twice. Okay. More than twice, she admitted, peeking out from behind the pillow. Don't make it weird. Brad grinned. I'm not making it weird. I'm just wondering if I should start practicing saying, Dad. Gina laughed, tossing the pillow at him. Stop. Brad caught it easily, his smile softening. So, what are these names? Gina hesitated, then rattled off a few, normal, sweet names that made Brad's chest tighten in a way he didn't expect. He masked it with humor. Not bad. None of them sound like future Bond villains. She laughed, relief flooding her face. Good. Brad studied her for a moment, something warm settling in his chest. She wasn't just playing house in her head. She was picturing a life with him in it. And for Brad, that mattered more than any word she'd said at that party. Later, as Gina dozed off against his shoulder, Brad stared at the muted credits on the screen and thought about risk. Love was still a gamble. But tonight, it felt less like roulette and more like poker, a game where knowing the other player mattered. And Brad was starting to think he knew Gina better than ever. Chapter 10 The Choice. Brad wasn't a man who rushed decisions. He liked to weigh things, measure risk against reward, and then move forward with purpose. That's how he handled work, money, and life. Love, though? Love didn't always play by those rules. It was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes felt like betting blind. But tonight, as he sat on his balcony with Gina's laughter still echoing in his head from earlier, Brad realized something. He didn't feel blind anymore. The past few weeks had been a reset, a chance to see Gina without the haze of assumptions. And what he saw was someone who cared. Not just in words, but in actions. She'd shown up. She'd tried. She'd laughed with him, cooked disasters with him, bowled gutter balls with him. She wasn't looking for something better. She was looking for him. Brad leaned back in his chair, staring at the city lights. He thought about his grandfather's advice. Life's a risk, kid. But some risks are worth it. Grandpa had been talking about buying a fishing boat, but the principle applied. Brad wasn't afraid of risk. He was afraid of wasting it on the wrong person. And Gina? She didn't feel wrong. She felt like the kind of risk that mattered. Across town, Gina was curled up on her couch, scrolling through photos of their recent adventures. Bowling night selfies, the infamous pasta brick, Brad holding a BuzzFeed quiz result like it was a diploma. She smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. For weeks, she'd worried she was losing him. Now, she felt like she'd found him all over again. Still, a flicker of doubt lingered. She wanted more than laughter and comfort. She wanted intention. She wanted to know Brad wasn't just coasting, that he was choosing her, not by default but deliberately. Brad set his beer down and pulled out his phone. He didn't text Gina. He didn't call. Instead, he opened a browser and started searching for something. Something that wasn't flowers or jewelry or a cliché. He wanted a gesture that said, I see you, I choose you, and I'm not afraid of this risk. His eyes landed on an idea that made him grin. A little quirky, a little bold, and very Brad. It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't even close. But it was a statement. A promise without the pressure. And if Gina laughed, perfect. If she cried, even better. Brad closed his laptop, his mind clear. Tomorrow he'd make it happen. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Brad felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Certainty. Not because love was suddenly safe, but because he was ready to bet on it. And for Brad Grahm, that was everything. Chapter 11 The Gesture. Brad wasn't the grand gesture type. He didn't believe in skywriting or flash mobs or anything that involved choreographed dancing. But he did believe in meaning and humor. If he was going to make a statement, it had to feel like him. Thoughtful, a little quirky, and guaranteed to make Gina laugh. Saturday afternoon, Brad texted Gina. Be ready at 6. Dress casual. Trust me. Gina stared at her phone, curiosity buzzing. Trust me was not Brad's usual tone. He was steady, predictable. This sounded mysterious. She replied, Should I be worried? Brad sent back a single word. Never. At 6 sharp, Gina opened her door to find Brad standing there with a grin and, of all things, a giant cardboard box. She blinked. What is that? Your future, Brad said solemnly, then cracked a smile. Sort of. Gina laughed, stepping aside as he carried the box in. Okay, you're officially weird. Always, Brad said, setting the box on the floor. Open it. Gina knelt down, lifting the flaps, and froze. Inside was a massive, plush alien doll wearing a tiny t-shirt that read, Brad's nice. But he's also out of this world. Gina burst out laughing, tears springing to her eyes. Oh my God, you didn't. I did, Brad said, grinning. Because if I'm going to be nice, I'm going to be intergalactically nice. Gina laughed harder, clutching the alien like it was treasure. This is ridiculous. Ridiculous is my brand, Brad said, dropping onto the couch. But there's more. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Simple, honest, and very Brad. Life's a risk. Love's a bigger one. But I'm betting on us. No committees. No tests. Just you and me. Deal? Gina stared at the words, her throat tightening. She looked up at him, eyes shining. Deal, she whispered. Brad smiled, relief washing through him like sunlight. Good, because I already bought the alien. No refunds. Gina laughed through her tears, launching herself into his arms. You're insane. Certified, Brad said, holding her close. But you love that. I do, Gina said softly. More than nice. Way more. Later, as they sat tangled on the couch with the alien propped between them like a silent witness, Gina thought about how far they'd come. From uncertainty to clarity, from nice to something real. And Brad? He thought about risk. He'd taken one tonight, and for the first time in his life, he was glad he did. Chapter 12, The Commitment. The alien sat proudly on Brad's bookshelf like a green sentinel, its tiny t-shirt declaring a truth Gina would never forget. Brad's nice. But he's also out of this world. Every time she looked at it, she laughed, and maybe teared up a little. It wasn't just a joke. It was a promise. And tonight, she wanted to talk about what came next. They were on Brad's balcony again, city lights glittering like scattered stars. Gina curled up in a blanket, sipping tea, while Brad leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out, looking like a man who'd finally exhaled after weeks of holding his breath. So, Gina began, her voice soft but steady. About that note. Brad glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. The one where I bet on us. Yeah, Gina said, smiling too. I liked it. Good, Brad said. Because I meant it. Gina nodded, her heart thudding. I know, and I want you to know. I'm all in. No tests, no committees, just us. Brad chuckled. Music to my ears. Gina hesitated, then plunged ahead. So, where do you see this going? Brad didn't flinch. He didn't stall. He looked at her, calm and clear. Forward. She laughed softly. That's vague. Okay, Brad said, leaning forward. Not marriage tomorrow, not next month. But I see us building something real. Intentional. No coasting. Gina's chest warmed. That's what I want too. Brad smiled. Good. Because I was starting to think I'd have to propose with that alien doll. Gina laughed, shaking her head. Please don't. Too late, Brad said, deadpan. I already bought a ring for its finger. She laughed harder, tears stinging her eyes. You're ridiculous. Always, Brad said, his grin softening into something tender. But I'm serious, Gina. I want this. I want you. And I'm not afraid of the risk anymore. Gina reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. Me neither. They sat in silence for a while, watching the city hum below, their fingers intertwined. No grand declarations. No fireworks. Just two people choosing each other deliberately without fear. For Brad, that was everything. For Gina, it was more than enough. Chapter 13 Epilogue. The apartment looked different this year. Same gold streamers. Same fairy lights, but with one new addition. A giant plush alien perched on the bookshelf like a green guardian of their love life. His tiny t-shirt still read, Brad's nice. But he's also out of this world. Gina smiled every time she saw it. The living room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. 16 friends again, counting down the last hours of the year. Brad stood near the kitchen, debating with Mark, because some traditions never die. I'm telling you, Mark said, waving a tortilla chip like a sword. Aliens are real. Brad grinned. Sure. And they're probably judging your chip technique. Mark pointed at the alien doll. Evidence, my friend. Brad laughed. That's not evidence. That's commitment. Across the room, Gina was laughing with her friends, her eyes finding Brad like they always did now. She walked over, slipping her arm around his waist. Still arguing about probes? Always, Brad said, kissing her temple. It's our thing. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, and everyone shouted along. At 3, Gina raised her glass, her voice cutting through the noise. To risks, she said, smiling at Brad. The ones worth taking. Brad's chest tightened, warmth flooding in. He clinked his glass against hers, grinning. To risks. The room erupted in cheers as midnight struck. Fireworks popped in the distance. Laughter filled the air. And Brad kissed Gina like a man who knew exactly what he wanted, and wasn't afraid of it anymore. Gina pulled back just enough to whisper, Brad's not just nice. Brad smirked. Oh, she smiled, eyes shining. He's my favorite risk. Brad laughed softly, holding her close as the new year began. No doubts, no tests, just two people who chose each other. And for Brad Grahm, that was everything.